this was the first one. Any questions folks would like to ask? Arlene?
So the idea that living in the community is an exception, a waiver, there's been attempts for many, a couple of decades at least, to kind of switch that back around because it's so inconsistent with the ADA and everything we've been talking about. And I'm wondering if anyone has any insights about whether that, I mean, as long as you call it a waiver to live in the community, instead of, if you live in the community, maybe there's a waiver if you can't for some reason. Is it still a pipe dream?
Well, I mean, yeah, I'd be interested to hear what other people have to say about it. My take on it is, look, so the basic question was, just to repeat for people who haven't been able to hear, was the Medicaid makes the default that services are provided to people in institutional settings. I'm papering over a lot of complexities, but that's the basic default. And in order to serve people with disabilities in their own homes, states need to get waivers of the Medicaid law. Now, they get lots of waivers. I mean, it happens all the time. But they have to ask special permission for it. Why not switch the default? Why not have the default be services get provided to people in the most integrated setting as the ADA requires, also have that be the default requirement of Medicaid? And you know there have been efforts by the disability community to try to make that the default. And through the years, I think with increasing success, I think the Affordable Care Act provisions that creates a state plan option, for example, for community-based services, we're providing an enhanced Medicaid match to states for that. Right, that helps. Various other incentives help, but there's, as you know, been great resistance by a whole array of people outside the disability community to just flipping the default. I think that's something the community is going to have to continue to work on.
Hey, Andrew.
Andrew Strong with the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I'm also a co-chair of the CCD Housing Task Force, so the Rights Task Force that Jennifer does such great work. There's another one that works on housing. And I think all of you have alluded to the very difficult challenge of getting decent, safe, affordable housing in the community. And one of the biggest barriers is the poverty that people with severe disabilities face. Those that are on SSI, we put out a book every year comparing SSI income levels to fair market rents. You simply cannot make this happen without an ongoing rent subsidy. And so we're working hard to make sure this housing is available. And it's a big challenge because the HUD programs are at capacity in terms of the availability of vouchers. We have one program that's oriented directly toward Olmstead implementation. It's a HUD program, the 811 Project-Based Rental Assistance Demonstration. And we did 3,000 units last year with less money than the program got over the previous 2 years. So we're making some progress here. The challenge is the administration wanted to cut the program by $40 million, and the T-HUD bill that's on the floor right now today in the Senate actually sustains that cut. So we've got a long way to go in the housing. I apologize for not a question, but please comment on what can we do to make sure we have an adequate supply of housing, and particularly ongoing rent subsidies, because a third of an SSI check is not enough to keep the lights on in the unit.
So I think there are two different issues, and I think part of what the Olmstead litigation has done is, and some of the Olmstead work is, we've been able to kind of separate them and sort of look at their interrelationship. So there's a problem with having affordable housing, just in general in this country. We don't have enough affordable housing. And that's an enterprise which has been some disinvestment over the years as part of the federal government. But we have a lot of advocacy for more affordable housing, including for people with disabilities. There's kind of this separate question of giving, that you raised, kind of giving people access to the housing that exists. And for people on SSI, they will need a rental subsidy. They'll need some additional money to pay the rent. And supported housing, one of the technologies that's used, or the primary technology that's really used for helping people in this bind live in their own homes, the supported housing actually includes both a rental subsidy and supports that the person needs to succeed living in their own home. But I think one of the things that Olmstead litigation has done is also focus attention on the fact that institutions not only provide services, they provide housing. And the fact is that many of the people are going into the institutions for a lack of alternative housing. And when you look at the institutions, it's basically providing two services. This has been very explicit in some cases, including one of the early cases, the DAI case. The government is providing in institutional settings, be it board and care homes or nursing homes, they're providing you both a set of services and a roof over your head. And it just turns out that's really, really expensive. So in the Olmstead litigation, what we do is we convert some of the dollars that are used to support the institution into rental subsidies. So I think every Olmstead settlement that deals with housing takes some of the institutional dollars and basically converts it into a rental subsidy. So that works fine for the group on whose behalf the settlement has been negotiated. It doesn't work for everyone else who doesn't have, for whom that reallocation hasn't occurred because they're still stuck in an unnecessarily institutional setting. And it's interesting, the 3,000 new units of basically rental subsidies through the 811 program. I mean, even Sam created more than 3,000 in just one settlement. There's the Olmstead litigation itself, and the settlements have generated an enormous amount of rental subsidies. But that technology really hasn't kind of caught on yet, I think, particularly the technology of converting institutional dollars to rental subsidies.
Can I say one thing about that? I totally agree with everything Ira said. I just think for an audience of people who spend time on Capitol Hill and are focused on affecting what Congress does, so the difficult point in negotiating all these Olmstead settlements that do have thousands of rental subsidies included in them. I mean, if you look at the Georgia settlement, the Delaware settlement, et cetera, they have explicitly the states are going to provide rental subsidies to X hundreds of people over each year. The difficulty in negotiating them is a budgetary difficulty created by the fact that they're reallocating money that is currently really paying for housing, but it's spent by Medicaid, to money that Medicaid won't reimburse, which is to pay for housing in the community. The federal housing programs are not really well geared toward just providing rental subsidies to people who are on SSI who want to go out and rent a house that's in the community. Don't need any special housing built for them. And so I think it's just really important in focusing on what kind of housing programs Congress funds to really fight for that housing subsidy piece that can promote integration in the community, and it's not just tied to kind of creating new disability-only centers.
I just wanted to get one of you to clarify something that Sam alluded to in the context of Medicaid, the institutional bias, but sort of one of the reasons why change has been hard to create. You all talked about the tyranny of low expectations and how change is hard. It really, we have systems that have been premised on old thinking about people with disabilities and their capabilities, and this notion that if somebody lives in an institution, that there must be a reason that they're there and they must need to be there. But beyond that, and Sam sort of alluded to kind of other sets of interests that have cropped up that have prevented change from happening. But I don't think anybody's really sort of fleshed that out a little bit, and I wonder if somebody could just say a couple of words about what that means.
Well, it actually sort of varies, I think, from situation to situation, and kind of classically, it was almost easier to describe with the classic state institutions, and there are a lot of people still in state-operated institutions needlessly, because there you sometimes have employee organizations, state employees who resist change. You may have legislators from the district in which the institution is located, resisting change because that's a primary source of employment, and also jobs. I mean, an institution has to be maintained. Someone has to deliver the food. And so there's a lot of vested economic interest. I think you also have, and this is I tried to allude to before, a kind of or something that's vested private interests as well. And in some cases you have for-profit operators. A lot of the board and care homes that have been the subject of Olmstead litigation are run by people who are kind of doing it for profit. Many nursing homes are obviously for profit. So there's a resistance to kind of ending that line of business, and in many places those economic interests, the nursing home lobby, including a lot. There are trade associations that kind of work care homes that are increasingly rebranding themselves as assisted living facilities, and they can be very powerful within the political process. So I think as the system has become privatized, and I think appropriately so, it's kind of changed the politics from protecting state institutions to sort of protecting private interests. And part of the reason for the Olmstead, the need for the Olmstead litigation, part of the reason for these key principles is to kind of help break down those barriers. But I do think it's true. I mean, I might be Pollyannish here, but I do think it's true that in general, folks want to do the right thing, and that a primary problem we have is a lack of understanding about these issues and about the capabilities of people's abilities. And it's the kind of discrimination that the ADA was meant to address. There's obviously was some kind of bad animus, but it was largely kind of unwarranted, mistaken assumptions about people with disability, and a certain amount of kind of devaluing their lives. And I think you kind of see, to a certain extent, that being played out here.
Virginia.
Hi, Virginia. Well, thank you for your great presentations. You were all right on and really presented. I'd be especially interested to hear from your perspective where state and federal level actions can work together, where the leverage points to move these agendas forward.
I mean, and the federal level, at some sort of federal level is easiest because there are these organizations like CCD that bring people together and set priorities. I think at the state level, what we're seeing increasingly is cross-disability coalitions, replicating CCD and other similar organizations, focused on community integration. And in some places, those coalitions have been very strong and very successful. So I think this is a cross-disability issue. It's kind of a central issue. And often the people who are most disadvantaged by the discrimination are kind of least capable of political organizing when they're locked up and they're poor, or they're very isolated, and they're poor. One thing that's come to mind, and Sam mentioned Medicaid. There's going to be a lot of change, hard to anticipate all of it, with the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. But there should be a huge expansion of the Medicaid population. That's a source of services. There's an active issue about what the service package will look like for people with disabilities. I think there are going to be a lot of changes in the healthcare world and the service world as a result. And I don't know exactly how you anticipate them all, but I think one focus, I would think, for state advocates is kind of looking at how that can all be influenced to serve a variety of events, but including community integration.
Okay, now there's a bunch of very increasingly anxious people outside waiting to come in, so I guess we should stop.